In the middle of endless blue, where the horizon melts into sky, there existed a knowledge most of us have forgotten. A knowledge written in clouds, written in the flight of birds, written in the taste of wind on weathered lips. The ocean holds no fresh water, and yet men sailed for months. They crossed vast distances under the Caribbean sun. They survived. Tonight, we sail with them. We discover how pirates and sailors found water where there seemed to be none. We learn the quiet wisdom of those who read the sea like a book. We drift into their world of simple observation, patient waiting, and the gentle rhythms of life aboard wooden ships. Before we embark on this journey together, if you find peace in these stories, consider supporting this channel with a like. Subscribe for more calm bedtime stories that guide you toward rest. Your presence here matters. Now, let us begin. Close your eyes if you wish. Feel the gentle rocking beneath you. The ship moves slowly through dark water. Above, stars fill the entire sky. The air is warm. The sails hang quiet. And somewhere in this vastness, water waits to be found. Water is life. On land, this truth remains hidden beneath convenience. Taps flow, rivers run, rain falls on rooftops and gardens. But at sea, water becomes visible as the most precious thing in existence. A ship could carry gold, silk, spices from distant islands. But without fresh water, none of it mattered. Men would die of thirst while floating on an ocean of salt water. The irony was not lost on sailors of the 18th century. They joked about it in port taverns. They stopped joking after 2 weeks at sea. A typical merchant ship carried water in wooden barrels, oak barrels, sealed with tar, stacked below deck in the coolest part of the hold. Each barrel held about 50 gallons. Each man needed roughly a gallon per day for drinking and cooking. Do the simple mathematics. A crew of 80 men needed 80 gallons daily. For a voyage of 60 days, that meant 4,800 gallons. Nearly 100 barrels. Space was limited. Every barrel of water meant one less barrel of cargo, one less barrel of profit. Pirates faced the same problem, but with less planning. They rarely stocked supplies for long journeys. They seized ships, took what they needed, and moved on. Their survival depended on finding water along the way. So they learned to read the ocean. They learned to watch. The old sailors could look at clouds and see water. Not the water inside the clouds, though they understood that too. They could see where clouds were formed. They could trace their movement. They could predict, with surprising accuracy, when rain would come. A pirate ship captain named Benjamin Hornigold once said that any man who could not read clouds had no business commanding a vessel. He was right. In a world without weather forecasts, without radio reports, without satellites watching from above, the sky told you everything. Cumulus clouds meant different things at different times. In the morning, small white cumulus clouds scattered across blue sky meant fair weather. The day would be hot, the wind steady, no rain, but watch those same clouds through the afternoon. If they grew taller, building upward into towers of white and grey, rain might come by evening. The higher they built, the more certain the rain. When the tops of these clouds flattened into anvil shapes, sailors knew a storm approached. Storms meant water, dangerous water, arriving with violence and wind, but water nonetheless. Cumulonimbus clouds, dark and towering, could be seen from 40 miles away. A lookout with sharp eyes would spot them on the horizon. The captain would adjust course, sailing toward the storm if water was desperately needed, or away from it if supplies were adequate. Cirrus clouds, thin and wispy, high above, meant weather would change within a day. These delicate brushstrokes across the sky foretold wind shifts and approaching fronts. Stratus clouds, low and grey, brought drizzle, gentle rain that could last for hours. This was ideal water-collecting weather, not violent, not dangerous, just persistent moisture falling steadily onto canvas and wood. The pirates learned this not from books, but from observation, day after day, month after month, season after season. They watched the sky the way we might watch a clock. It told them what was coming. At night, in the quiet darkness of the open ocean, a sailor on watch could hear rain approaching. The sound carried across water, first a distant whisper, like wind through leaves, but softer, more continuous. Then, growing closer, the distinct patter of raindrops on ocean surface. Thousands of tiny impacts creating a gentle roar, like applause from an invisible audience. The sailor would call down to those sleeping below. Rain coming, 2 words that would wake the entire crew. Because rain meant work, rain meant opportunity, rain meant life. Within minutes, men emerged onto the deck. They moved with practiced efficiency, even in darkness. Each person knew their task. They had performed this ritual dozens of times. Canvas sheets, normally used for repairing sails, were stretched across sections of the deck. The edges were raised slightly, creating shallow pools. The canvas sloped toward corners where buckets waited. Other men positioned large funnels beneath gaps in the rigging. These funnels led to barrels. The sails themselves became collection surfaces. As rain fell on canvas, it would run down in streams, channeled by the weave of the fabric. Men stood with buckets, catching these streams. The water was not yet pure. It carried salt from the canvas, dirt from the rigging, tar from the ropes. But it was fresh water. It tasted of sky and cloud. After the initial collection, they would strain it through cloth, then pour it into barrels for storage. The first rain of any shower was often discarded. It washed salt and debris from the collection surfaces. The second and third rain was kept. A good storm could fill 20 barrels in an hour. This was abundance. This changed everything. Men would stand in the rain, mouths open, drinking directly from the sky, laughing, feeling the cool water run down their faces and necks. After weeks of careful rationing, this felt like a miracle. The ship itself seemed grateful. Rain washed salt from the wood. It rinsed the deck. It filled the air with the smell of wetness and life. Land birds meant land, and land meant fresh water. This was perhaps the simplest and oldest navigation technique known to sailors. Birds must drink. Birds must rest. Therefore, birds cannot fly more than a certain distance from shore. A pirate lookout who spotted land birds would note their direction. If the birds were flying strongly in one direction, they were heading toward land. If they circled aimlessly, they were likely lost. If they landed on the ship to rest, land was far away. Different birds meant different distances. Gulls could range 30 or 40 miles from shore. Seeing gulls meant land was within a day's sail, perhaps less. Terns were similar, though they sometimes ventured farther. Pelicans stayed closer to land, rarely venturing more than 20 miles from shore. A pelican sighting meant land was very near, possibly just beyond the horizon. Frigate birds, with their distinctive forked tails and massive wingspan, were ocean wanderers. They could soar for days without rest. Seeing frigate birds meant nothing about land proximity, but they did congregate near islands, especially during breeding season. The most valuable birds were the small land birds, warblers, sparrows, finches. These tiny creatures could not survive long at sea. They needed trees, fresh water, insects. If a small land bird landed on a pirate ship's rigging, exhausted and desperate, the sailors knew land was within 50 miles. They would carefully note the direction from which the bird had come. Sometimes they would keep the bird in a cage and release it the next morning, then follow its flight path. This was not cruelty. This was survival. The bird wanted land as desperately as the sailors wanted water. Its instincts would guide it home. The sailors simply followed that ancient knowledge. The ocean changes color near land. Deep ocean water is dark blue, almost purple in certain lights. It appears bottomless because it is. Beneath the surface, the water drops thousands of feet into cold darkness. But near islands, near coasts, near anywhere that fresh water flows into the sea, the color shifts. It becomes lighter, turquoise, aquamarine, pale green. This change happens because the water is shallower. Light penetrates to the bottom and reflects back. Sand, coral, rocks beneath the surface influence the color. Pirates learned to read these color changes. A patch of lighter water ahead might indicate a sandbar, a reef, or a shoal. It might also indicate the outflow of a river. Fresh water, flowing from land into ocean, created visible patterns. The fresh water, being less dense than salt water, would float on top for a while before mixing. A skilled pilot could sometimes taste the difference. They would lower a bucket on a rope, drawing water from different depths. Near the surface, near the mouth of a river, the water would taste less salty, still brackish, but noticeably different. This technique worked best near large rivers, the Amazon, the Orinoco, the Mississippi. These massive rivers pushed fresh water miles into the ocean. Pirates working the Caribbean knew the major rivers. They knew where fresh water met salt water. They knew how to approach these mixing zones carefully, avoiding the shifting sandbars and strong currents. Old sailors spoke of tasting land on the wind. This was not metaphor. This was real. Wind blowing from land toward sea carried scents. The smell of vegetation, of flowers, of earth. On a ship that had been at sea for weeks, breathing only salt air, these land smells were unmistakable. Pine trees had a distinct aroma. Mangroves smelled of mud and decay, but it was the sweet decay of living swamps, not the dead salt smell of the open ocean. Tropical islands carried the scent of hibiscus, frangipani, rotting fruit. A pirate with a sensitive nose could detect these smells from 10 miles away on a favorable wind. They would turn to face the wind, breathing deeply, separating the scents. Fresh water itself has a smell. Rain-washed earth, wet stones, river water carrying the essence of inland forests and mountains. When wind blew from shore after a rainstorm, it carried the unmistakable smell of fresh water. Heavy, almost sweet. Nothing like the sharp, mineral smell of the ocean. Men would stand at the bow, facing into the wind, breathing this information. Their eyes might be closed. They were reading the world through their nose. In darkness, in fog, when sight was useless, smell became navigation. On calm nights, when the air was still and the stars bright, dew would form. Moisture from the air condensed on every surface. The sails, the ropes, the wooden rails, the canvas. Everything became wet with tiny droplets. This was not much water, but to men who understood scarcity, every drop mattered. At dawn, before the sun rose and evaporated the dew, crew members would wring out sails and ropes. They would run cloths along the rails and collect the moisture. They would tilt canvas to encourage drips into waiting cups. From an entire ship, this method might yield a gallon. perhaps 2 gallons on a particularly heavy dew night. For a crew of 80 men, this was nearly nothing. But it was something. It was water that fell from the sky freely. It required no rain, no storm, no violence, just patience and the willingness to work for small rewards. Some pirates became experts at dew collection. They would spread extra canvas on deck before sunset. They would position it to catch the maximum dew. They would weight the corners with stones so the wind would not blow it away. Then, in the early morning, they would carefully gather the moisture. This was meditation. This was ritual. This was the art of paying attention to small things. Every pirate knew certain islands, secret places not marked on merchant maps, hidden coves with fresh water streams, small islands with natural springs, beaches where streams emerged directly onto sand. These locations were shared through oral tradition. One pirate would tell another. The information passed from ship to ship, tavern to tavern, generation to generation. 3 days south of Nassau, there is a small island, no name, just rocks and palm trees. On the north side, behind the black rocks, a stream flows from a cave. The water is cold and sweet. You can fill every barrel in half a day. These directions were vague deliberately, too specific, and the location might become known to naval vessels, might become known to governors and map makers. The secrecy protected the resource. Some islands had natural cisterns, depressions in rock that collected rainwater. The rock was often limestone, which filtered the water and kept it cool. Pirates would find these cisterns, often hidden by vegetation, and treat them like treasure. More valuable than treasure, really. Gold could not save you from thirst. Water could. The unwritten law among pirates was simple. Never foul the water source. Never pollute a stream or spring. Take only what you need. Leave the place as you found it, because you would need to return someday. This was survival ethics. This was understanding that nature's gifts must be respected. Some pirates understood basic principles of distillation. They knew that salt water could be heated until it became steam. The steam, being pure water vapor, could be condensed back into liquid. This liquid would be fresh water, free of salt. In practice, this was difficult on a wooden ship. It required fire, metal pots, cooling tubes, time, and fuel. A ship's galley could produce small amounts of distilled water, but never enough for an entire crew. The process was slow. It required constant attention, and it consumed firewood, which was almost as precious as water. But in desperate situations, some water could be made this way. A pot of salt water boiling over the galley fire. A cloth held over the steam, catching the condensation. The cloth wrung out into a cup. 1 cup of fresh water from an hour of careful work. Not practical for daily needs, but possible. The knowledge was there. Some innovative sailors experimented with solar stills. These were boxes lined with black cloth or metal. Salt water would be placed in a shallow dish inside the box. The box would be covered with glass or clear material. In hot sun, the water would evaporate, condense on the glass, and drip into a collection channel. These devices worked slowly, very slowly. A solar still might produce a pint of water per day in ideal conditions, but it required no fuel, no attention, no work. It simply sat in the sun, transforming salt water into fresh water through the patient power of evaporation and condensation. Pirates were thieves, but they were also traders. When they encountered other vessels, there was not always violence. Sometimes there was negotiation, sometimes there was exchange. A pirate ship low on water, might approach a merchant vessel and offer trade. Captured goods for fresh water. The merchant captain, wanting to avoid a fight, might agree. 10 barrels of water for a barrel of rum, or 4 bolts of cloth, or for tools, or for safe passage. This was maritime economy at its most basic. Both sides had something the other needed. Both sides wanted to avoid bloodshed if possible. Fighting was expensive. Men died. Ships were damaged. Cargo was lost. Trading was clean. Trading was quick. A pirate ship might also approach fishing vessels near shore. These small boats often came from coastal villages. They had access to fresh water. They could refill containers easily. A pirate would offer silver coins or trade goods. The fishermen would row to shore, fill casks from the village well, and return. Everyone benefited. The fishermen earned money. The pirates got water. No one was hurt. There were also neutral ports, places where pirates and merchants and naval vessels all stopped for supplies. These ports asked no questions. They sold water, food, and repair services to anyone who paid. Nassau in the Bahamas was such a place for many years. Port Royal in Jamaica, Tortuga off the coast of Hispaniola. In these havens, water was a commodity like any other. It could be purchased by the barrel. The price fluctuated based on supply and demand. After a dry season, water prices rose. After heavy rains, prices fell. Pirates budgeted for water the same way they budgeted for gunpowder and rope. When water was scarce, it had to be rationed. This was not cruelty. This was mathematics. If a ship had 40 barrels of water remaining and was 2 weeks from land, the calculation was simple. 40 barrels meant 2,000 gallons. 2 weeks meant 14 days. For 80 men, there was 1,120 gallons needed. The numbers worked, barely, but only if discipline held. A quartermaster, the man responsible for supplies, would take control of the water. He kept the key to the storage hold. He personally distributed the daily ration to each man. 1 cup in the morning, 1 cup at midday, 1 cup in the evening, 3 cups total, less than a quart per day. This was survival minimum in hot weather. Enough to prevent death, but not enough to prevent discomfort. Men were constantly thirsty. Their lips cracked. Their mouths felt dry. They thought about water constantly. Stealing water was a serious offense. On some pirate ships, the punishment for stealing water was death, or marooning, which was effectively the same thing. The code was clear. Individual greed endangered everyone. Men endured the thirst together. They encouraged each other. They spoke about the rain that would come, about the island that waited ahead, about the cold, sweet water they would drink soon. This was shared suffering. This created bonds stronger than comfort ever could. Thirst is different from hunger. You can survive weeks without food. Your body consumes itself, burning fat and eventually muscle, but consciousness remains. You can think, you can move, you suffer, but you endure. Thirst kills in days. 3 days without water, maybe 4 in cool weather, and the body begins to shut down. The blood thickens, the heart labors, the brain swells, hallucinations begin. Sailors knew this progression. They had seen men die of thirst. So when water was low, fear was present. Not panic, but a deep, cold awareness of mortality. Every man knew that his life depended on water, on rain coming, on reaching land in time, on the captain's navigation being correct. Some men became irritable, others became withdrawn. The quartermaster watched for these signs. Severe thirst led to irrationality. A thirsty man might drink seawater, which would only accelerate death. The salt would pull moisture from the body, causing faster dehydration. Experienced sailors knew better, but desperate men did desperate things. So the quartermaster and senior crew members would watch the men carefully. They would encourage them, tell stories, maintain morale, keep hope alive. Hope was survival. Hope was the belief that water would come, and it almost always did. Pirates operating in the Caribbean learned from indigenous peoples. The native inhabitants of these islands had survived for thousands of years without European technology. They knew the land, they knew the water, they knew secrets that sailors were eager to learn. Some islands had no visible streams or rivers, yet the native people had fresh water. They knew where to dig. They understood the underground aquifers. They knew that fresh water, being less dense than salt water, would float on top of the saltwater table underground. On small coral islands, if you dug a shallow well near the center of the island, you would find fresh water. The water table rose and fell with the tides, but it was there, brackish but drinkable, life-sustaining. Pirates learned this technique. When they landed on seemingly dry islands, they would dig pits inland from the beach, 2 or 3 feet deep. Wait for water to seep in. The water was cloudy at first, mixed with sand, but after settling, it was drinkable. Native people also showed them certain plants, vines that stored water in their hollow stems. You could cut a section of vine and water would pour out. Not much, maybe a cup from a 6-foot section, but it was something. Barrel cactus in drier regions stored water in their flesh. You could cut open the cactus and squeeze out moisture. The water was bitter and not ideal, but it would keep you alive. Coconuts were obvious water sources. The liquid inside young coconuts was sterile, nutritious, and refreshing. A single palm tree might have 30 coconuts. That was 30 portions of safe drinking liquid. Pirates learned to respect the knowledge of people who had lived on these islands forever. These were not savages. These were experts in survival. These were teachers. Water had to be stored carefully. Oak barrels were the standard container. Oak was strong, relatively watertight, and did not impart too much flavor. Each barrel was made by a cooper, a craftsman who shaped wooden staves and bound them with iron hoops. The barrel had to be absolutely clean before filling. Any residue from previous contents would contaminate the water. If a barrel had held rum or wine, it had to be scrubbed thoroughly. Sailors would rinse barrels with seawater, scrub the inside with brushes, then rinse again with fresh water if available. The barrels were then sealed with wooden bungs, hammered tight. They were stored in the coolest part of the ship, below deck, away from sunlight. Heat caused evaporation. Even in a sealed barrel, some water would be lost through the wood. The loss was small, maybe a gallon per barrel per month, but it added up. Water quality declined over time. After a month, barrel water would taste stale, wooden, slightly rotten. This was caused by algae growing inside the barrel, by sediment settling, by the slow decay of the wood itself. Some sailors added a small amount of rum or wine to the water. This was not for taste. The alcohol inhibited bacterial growth. It kept the water safer to drink. The ratio was roughly 1 part alcohol to 4 parts water. Enough to preserve, but not enough to cause drunkenness. Other sailors added vinegar, which had similar preservative effects. And some added nothing, accepting that older water would taste bad but would still sustain life. On a ship, you could hear the water. At night, in the quiet, the barrels made soft sounds. The water inside would slosh gently with the ship's movement. Each barrel had its own voice. Full barrels made a deep, heavy sound. Half-full barrels sloshed more actively. Nearly empty barrels were almost silent. The quartermaster would listen to these sounds. Walking through the storage hold with a lantern, he could assess inventory by sound alone. He knew which barrels were full, which were half empty, which needed to be consumed first. This was intimate knowledge. This was attention paid to details that kept men alive. The sound of water being poured was one of the most beautiful sounds on a ship. The splash of it into a wooden cup, the gulp of a man drinking. These simple sounds meant abundance. They meant safety. When water was rationed strictly, these sounds became rare. Men would drink their rations slowly, savoring every swallow, making it last, trying to trick their minds into believing they had drunk more than they had. When rain came, there was joy, but there was also ritual. The first rain after weeks of dry weather was cause for celebration. Men would strip off their shirts and stand in the downpour. They would wash themselves, washing away weeks of salt and sweat. They would laugh and splash like children. But first, the barrels had to be filled. Duty came before pleasure. The collection systems would be deployed. Men would work steadily, funneling rain into barrels. The quartermaster would count. 1 barrel, 2 barrels, 5 barrels, 10. Only when an adequate reserve was secured would the men be allowed to enjoy the rain. Then they would drink freely. They would pour water over their heads. They would rinse their clothes. They would fill every available container, knowing that more rain might not come for weeks. Some captains would declare a small celebration, an extra ration of rum, a meal with the last of the fresh vegetables, a night of music and storytelling. This was acknowledging the gift. This was gratitude expressed through community. The rain continued through the night. The steady drumming on the deck became a lullaby. Men slept deeply, reassured by the sound of abundance. The ship rocked gently. The barrels filled. And for a brief time, all was well. Young sailors learned from old sailors. This was how maritime knowledge survived. A boy joining his first ship would be assigned to an experienced seaman. This mentor would teach him everything: how to tie knots, how to read the stars, how to predict weather, how to find water. The lessons were not formal. They happened during daily work, during long watches, during shared meals. See those clouds on the horizon. Those will bring rain by tomorrow evening. Feel that wind. It has shifted. We are close to land. Taste this water. This is what good water tastes like. Remember it. The young sailor absorbed this information. He practiced. He made mistakes. He learned. Years later, when he was old and experienced, he would teach the next generation. He would pass down the same knowledge, modified by his own experiences. The tradition continued. Pirates were often young men. Many were teenagers, 16, 17, 18 years old. They learned fast because they had to. Mistakes could be fatal. But the learning was also gentle, patient. The old hands understood that everyone had been new once. Everyone had been frightened and uncertain. So they taught, they shared, they kept the knowledge alive. The Caribbean is not one place. It is thousands of places. Each island has its own character, its own water sources, its own secrets. The Lesser Antilles, that chain of small islands curving from Puerto Rico down to Trinidad, were known for their rain. These volcanic islands rose high from the sea. Mountains caught clouds. Rain fell almost daily on the windward sides. Pirates knew this. When water was needed, they would sail to the eastern shores of islands like Dominica or St. Lucia. Here streams tumbled down mountain slopes directly into the sea. You could anchor close to shore, send boats to the stream mouths, and fill barrels in hours. The water was cold, mountain water. It tasted of stone and forest. It was some of the best water in the Caribbean. Dominica, in particular, was called the Island of Rivers. Over 300 rivers and streams cut through its forests. The Kalinago people who lived there had always known this abundance. They shared their knowledge with pirates, who treated them with respect. The Greater Antilles were different. Cuba, Hispaniola, Jamaica, Puerto Rico. These larger islands had rivers, but they also had colonial settlements, Spanish towns with garrisons, places where pirates could not simply sail in and take water freely, so they learned the hidden places. On the southern coast of Cuba, there were dozens of small bays, mangrove swamps where streams emerged from inland forests. These places were unmarked. The Spanish did not patrol them. The water was brackish near the shore, but if you rowed upstream 100 yards, it turned fresh. Pirates would anchor offshore, hidden among small islands called cays. They would send small boats through the mangroves at dawn. The narrow channels twisted and turned. Mosquitoes swarmed. The heat was oppressive. But at the end of these channels, fresh water waited. The Bahamas presented different challenges. These islands were low, flat, mostly limestone and coral. Few rivers existed. Rain soaked quickly into the porous rock. Yet there was water underground. The limestone held vast aquifers, fresh water floating on denser seawater below. Pirates learned to find the natural wells. Blue holes, they were called. Circular pools of fresh water, sometimes hundreds of feet deep, connected to underground cave systems. These blue holes were sacred to the Lucayan people who originally inhabited the islands. The pirates treated them with similar reverence. You did not foul these waters. You did not camp too close. You took what you needed and left. Some blue holes were tidal, connected to the ocean through underground passages. The water would rise and fall with the tides, but it remained fresh, slightly brackish at high tide, but drinkable. Finding these holes required local knowledge. They were scattered across the islands, hidden among scrub vegetation. But once found, once marked in memory or on private charts, they became reliable resources. Water availability changed with seasons. The Caribbean has 2 seasons, not 4, wet season and dry season. Understanding these patterns meant the difference between abundance and scarcity. The wet season ran from May through November. These months brought rain, heavy rain, sometimes daily rain. The tropical storms and hurricanes of late summer and autumn brought the most intense rainfall. During these months, water was rarely a problem. Ships could collect rain regularly. Streams ran full. Springs overflowed. Every island was green and dripping. But pirates, sailing during wet season, faced other dangers. Storms could destroy ships. The constant dampness rotted food, corroded metal, and caused disease. So many pirates preferred to sail during dry season, despite the water challenges. The dry season, from December through April, brought steady trade winds and clear skies. Perfect sailing weather, but rain became rare. Streams shrank, springs diminished. Some smaller water sources dried up completely. Pirates planning dry season voyages had to be more careful. They had to carry more water. They had to know which islands had reliable year-round sources. The Virgin Islands, for example, were notoriously dry. These small islands received little rainfall, and what rain did fall soaked quickly into limestone. Pirates avoided the Virgin Islands during dry season, unless absolutely necessary. But they knew that Tortola had a few reliable springs. They knew that on the north side of Virgin Gorda there was a cave where water dripped from the ceiling year-round. Not much water, just a slow drip. But it was there, constant, reliable. They would catch the drips in cups, one drop at a time, patient, understanding that nature provides in her own time. The Windward Islands received more rain. They lay in the path of the trade winds, which carried moisture from the Atlantic. Even in dry season, these islands were green. Their streams ran, though at lower volume than during wet season. Pirates learned these patterns. They planned routes accordingly. They knew which islands to visit in which months. This knowledge was survival. Edward Teach, known as Blackbeard, understood water better than most. He sailed primarily along the Carolina coast and the Bahamas. These were challenging waters for finding fresh water. The Carolina coast had rivers, but they were controlled by colonial settlements. The Bahamas had limited natural sources. Blackbeard's strategy was intimidation combined with careful planning. He would capture merchant vessels and demand their water supplies as part of the ransom. Not gold, not cargo, water. This confused some captains who expected pirates to want valuables. But Blackbeard knew that water was the ultimate valuable. A ship could carry gold and still perish. A ship with water could always survive. He also maintained relationships with certain coastal communities, small fishing villages that were too isolated to be of interest to authorities. He would trade with these villages, silver coins for water, captured goods for water, sometimes just a promise of protection. The villagers agreed because Blackbeard kept his word. He never harmed these communities. He never stole from them. He paid fairly. This created a network of supply points along his usual routes. But Blackbeard also carried more barrels than most pirates. His ship, Queen Anne's Revenge, was a large vessel. He devoted significant cargo space to water storage. Some crew members grumbled about the lost space. They wanted more room for loot. Blackbeard would remind them that loot was worthless to dead men. His discipline regarding water was strict. Every man received the same ration, including Blackbeard himself. No exceptions. This fairness earned loyalty. Men would follow a captain who shared their hardships. During one famous incident, Blackbeard's fleet was becalmed off the Carolina coast for 2 weeks. The wind died completely. The ships sat motionless under burning sun. Water supplies dwindled. Other captains might have panicked, might have made rash decisions. Blackbeard cut rations immediately. He calculated exactly how long their water would last at different consumption rates. He determined they could survive 3 weeks on minimal rations. The crew trusted his mathematics. They endured. On the 13th day, rain came. Not much, a brief squall, but enough. They collected what they could. 3 days later, the wind returned. They sailed to an inlet Blackbeard knew, a hidden place where a stream emerged onto an empty beach. They refilled completely. The crew spoke of this incident for years. How Blackbeard's planning and discipline had saved them. How his knowledge of water sources had given them hope during the worst days. This was leadership. This was the kind of captain men would die for. John Rackham, called Calico Jack for his colorful clothing, operated primarily around Jamaica and the Bahamas in the early 1700s. He was not as famous as Blackbeard. His career was shorter, but he had his own water wisdom. Jamaica is a large island with mountains rising over 7,000 feet. These mountains catch rain clouds constantly. Rivers cascade down the slopes. The island has abundant water, but the coasts were heavily patrolled by the British Navy. Kingston was a major naval base. Pirates could not simply sail into Jamaican harbors for water. Calico Jack knew the north coast of Jamaica intimately. He had spent years sailing these waters as a young sailor before turning to piracy. He knew every bay, every inlet, every hidden beach. On the north coast, between Ocho Rios and Port Antonio, there are numerous small waterfalls that drop directly into the sea. The land is steep there. Mountains rise almost straight from the water. Streams cut through the rock and spill over cliffs. Some of these waterfalls are visible from sea. Others are hidden behind vegetation or rock formations. Calico Jack knew them all. He had names for them. Names that appeared on no official map. The Twin Falls, the Hidden Cascade, the Fern Spring. These were his personal landmarks. When water was needed, he would sail to one of these locations at night. The darkness provided cover. The sound of the waterfall would mask any noise the crew made. They would position the ship close to the cliff. Men would climb up with ropes and buckets. The waterfall provided fresh water under pressure. They could fill a bucket in seconds, rope it down to the deck, send it back up. The process was efficient. In one night, they could fill every barrel on the ship. By dawn, they would be gone, back to sea. No one on the island even knew they had been there. Calico Jack also taught his crew about coconut water. Jamaica had extensive coconut plantations along the coast. At night, men could swim to shore, gather coconuts from trees near the beach, and swim back. The young coconuts, still green, held the most liquid. One man could carry 2 coconuts while swimming. 20 men making multiple trips could bring back 100 coconuts. That was 25 gallons of safe drinking liquid. This was not a long-term solution. Coconut water had natural laxative effects if consumed in large quantities, but it supplemented their water supply. It provided variety. It gave men something to look forward to. Calico Jack understood morale. He understood that small pleasures mattered during long voyages. A fresh coconut, a secret waterfall, a successful night mission. These things kept spirits high. Bartholomew Roberts, also known as Black Bart, was one of the most successful pirates in history. He captured over 400 ships in his career. He sailed not just the Caribbean, but also the African coast. In Africa, he learned different water strategies. The African coast presented unique challenges. Many areas were extremely dry. Rivers were seasonal, flowing only during rainy months. The heat was intense. Water needs were higher. But the Portuguese and Dutch had established coastal trading posts. These posts had wells. Deep wells dug through sand to reach underground water tables. Roberts learned to find these wells, even in abandoned posts. The Portuguese would sometimes abandon a trading post, moving to a better location. They would leave behind buildings, walls, and wells. Roberts would locate these abandoned sites. The wells would be capped or covered, but they were still there. His crew would clear the debris, lower a bucket, and find water still present. The water was often stagnant. It smelled of earth and metal, but it was wet. It was drinkable after boiling. In West Africa, Roberts also learned about baobab trees. These massive trees store thousands of gallons of water in their swollen trunks. During dry season, local people would tap the trees carefully, drawing out small amounts of water without harming the tree. Roberts paid local guides to show him how this was done. A hole would be drilled into the trunk using a special auger. A hollow reed inserted. Water would flow out slowly. You could fill a bucket in half an hour. Then you sealed the hole with tree resin. The tree would heal. It would continue living. You had taken water without killing the source. This was sustainable harvesting. This was respect for nature's provisions. Roberts brought this knowledge back to the Caribbean. While there were no baobabs there, the principle applied. Take what you need, preserve the source, return to it later. His crew called him the Welsh pirate, but they also called him the careful captain. He wasted nothing. He planned everything. He survived longer than most pirates because he understood that survival was about small, daily decisions, not grand gestures. When a ship had been without rain for many weeks and water supplies were low, some crews performed what they called the rain dance. This was not a dance in the formal sense. It was a ritual, a ceremony of hope. The crew would gather on deck at sunset. The sky would be clear. No clouds, no promise of rain, just endless blue fading to darkness. The captain would speak first. He would acknowledge the situation. He would tell the crew they had enough water for 12 more days, or 10 days, or whatever the calculation showed. He would be honest. Then he would talk about rain, about how rain always came eventually, about how the sea gave and the sea took, but it never forgot its sailors. This was not religion exactly. Most pirates were not deeply religious men, but they were superstitious. They believed in patterns. They believed in luck. They believed that showing respect to the ocean might bring rewards. After the captain spoke, the crew would begin a slow chant. Not words, exactly, just a rhythm, a humming that matched the movement of waves. Some men would pour the last drops from their water cups onto the deck, an offering, a sacrifice, showing the sea that they were willing to give before asking to receive. This went on for an hour, maybe longer. The rhythm continued. The chant rose and fell. Men swayed in time. The ship rocked. Everything moved together. Eventually, it would end naturally. The energy would fade. Men would drift away to their sleeping spots. The watch would resume. Life continued. Did it work? Did the rain dance bring rain? Perhaps, perhaps not. Rain came when it came. But the ritual served another purpose. It unified the crew. It gave them something to do. It transformed anxiety into action. It reminded them they were not alone in their need. 3 days later, or 5 days later, or a week later, rain would come. The crew would look at each other and nod. The dance had worked. Their respect had been acknowledged. This was magical thinking, but it was also practical psychology. Hope is a tool. Belief is a resource. Men who believe they will survive are more likely to survive. The rain dance was not really about making rain appear. It was about making men believe they had some control, some influence, some connection to the forces that governed their lives. Every morning, just before dawn, a specific ritual took place on pirate ships. This was the dew collection ritual. 2 men, assigned the night before, would wake while the stars were still bright. They would move quietly, not disturbing those still sleeping. They would take cloth bags and buckets to the main deck. The ship would be covered in dew, every rope glistening, every surface wet, the wood of the deck dark with moisture. The 2 men would begin at the bow. They would run their cloths along the rails, wringing the moisture into buckets. They would work methodically, port side, then starboard side, along every rail, every rope, every surface they could reach. The sails held the most water. The canvas absorbed dew like a sponge. The men would pull sections of the lower sails down and wring them carefully. Drops would fall into waiting buckets. The sound was gentle, a soft patter, like the beginning of rain. This work took an hour. By the time they finished, the sky would be lightning. Pink and orange would streak the horizon. The sun would not yet be visible, but dawn would be approaching. The men would gather their buckets, 3 buckets, usually, sometimes for on a heavy dew morning. Each bucket held maybe 2 quarts of water. They would carry these buckets to the quartermaster. He would taste the water, fresh, clean, tasting slightly of canvas and wood, but pure nonetheless. This water was special. It was not added to the main supply. It was used immediately. The cook would use it for the morning meal, making porridge or boiling dried fish. The extra flavor from the canvas actually improved some dishes. But the real value of the ritual was not the water collected. The real value was the discipline it taught. The attention to small things, the patience to work for minimal reward, the understanding that every drop mattered. Young sailors learned this ritual early. It was often their first responsibility. Before they could be trusted with navigation or combat, they learned to collect dew. This taught them the pirate way. Nothing is too small to notice. Nothing is wasted. Nature provides, but you must pay attention. When storms came, the collection ritual was entirely different, more urgent, more chaotic, more rewarding. A storm could be seen hours before it arrived. The clouds would build on the horizon, dark towers reaching into the sky. The wind would shift. The air would smell different, charged, electric, full of promise. The quartermaster would give the order, prepare for collection. Every man knew his role. They had practiced this dozens of times. First, the collection canvas had to be deployed. These were special sheets of canvas, lighter than sail canvas, but still strong. They were stored, rolled up, in the hold. Men would carry them to the deck and begin spreading them. The canvas covered the central deck area. The edges were tied to rails and masts at a slight angle. The lowest corner would be positioned over a large barrel. This created a funnel. Rain would fall on the canvas, run down to the low corner, and pour into the barrel. Multiple collection stations would be set up, 4 or 5 separate canvas areas, each draining into its own barrel. Meanwhile, other men prepared the sails. The lower sails would be adjusted to catch rain and channel it toward collection points. Ropes would be positioned to guide water flow. Empty barrels were rolled up from the hold, lined up in rows. Bungs removed, ready to receive water. All of this happened quickly. The storm was approaching. They could see the rain now, a grey curtain moving across the ocean toward them. The wind increased. The first gusts hit the ship. Then the rain arrived. It started as large, scattered drops, then became a downpour. The sound was tremendous. Rain hitting canvas sounded like thunder. Continuous, overwhelming. Water poured from every surface. The collection canvases sagged with weight. Men guided the flow, ensuring nothing was wasted. The barrels filled rapidly. First barrel full. Bung it. Roll it aside. Replace with an empty. Second barrel full. Same process. The rain intensified. This was a tropical storm. Rain so heavy you could barely see 10 feet. Rain so thick it felt like standing under a waterfall. Men worked in teams. 2 men per collection station. 1 managing the canvas. 1 managing the barrels. They were soaked within seconds. Water ran down their faces, down their backs. Their clothes clung to their bodies, but they were laughing, shouting to each other. This was abundance. This was salvation. This was life pouring from the sky. The storm lasted an hour, maybe 2 hours. It was impossible to track time accurately. Everything was noise and movement and water. When the rain began to lighten, the quartermaster would assess. He would count barrels. 16 full, 20 full, 30 full. Enough water for 6 weeks, for 2 months. For a season, the crew would not immediately stop working. They would continue collecting until the rain became too light to be efficient. Every drop counted. Every barrel mattered. Finally, the quartermaster would signal, secure the collection. Men would roll the remaining barrels to the hold. They would carefully fold the collection canvas and store it properly. They would check each barrel's seal. They would clean up the deck. Only then would they rest. Only then would they celebrate. The captain might authorize an extra ration of rum. The cook might prepare a hot meal. Men would change into dry clothes and gather to tell stories. They would talk about this storm, how heavy the rain was, how much water they collected. They would compare it to other storms they remembered. Remember the storm off Tortuga? That one was heavier. No, this was heavier. We filled 32 barrels that time, but the storm lasted longer. These discussions were important. They were building collective memory, creating shared history, establishing the law that bound the crew together. When pirates traded for water, there was an art to it, a protocol that both sides understood. A pirate ship approaching a coastal village would fly certain signals, not the black flag. That would cause panic. Instead, they would fly a plain white flag or a merchant ensign, something that suggested peaceful intent. They would anchor offshore, within cannon range of the village, but not threateningly close. This showed capability, but not aggression. The captain would send a small boat to shore, 2 or 3 men, unarmed, visibly. One man would carry a bag of silver coins or trade goods. The village headman or elder would come to the beach. There would be a conversation, through gestures if language was a barrier, through interpreters if available. The pirate representative would explain their need: water, food, perhaps fresh fruit or vegetables. They would show what they offered in return: silver, cloth, tools, rum. The village elder would consider. He would consult with others. This was a decision that affected everyone. Trading with pirates was dangerous, but refusing them was also dangerous. Usually, an agreement was reached. The village had water to spare. The village could use silver. Both sides would benefit. The terms would be established: 20 barrels of water for 10 silver coins, or whatever the negotiation determined. Then the work would begin. Village men would fill barrels from the village well. They would roll these barrels to the beach. The pirate boat would carry them to the ship, trip after trip. The process took hours. During this time, there was a delicate balance. The pirates wanted to appear trustworthy. They would not bring more men ashore. They would not enter the village. They would remain polite and patient. The villagers wanted to appear helpful, but not weak. They would work efficiently, but not fearfully. They would show they had resources, but not unlimited resources. When the agreed number of barrels was delivered, payment would be made. The silver counted carefully. Both sides watching. Both sides satisfied. The pirates would thank the villagers. They would promise to remember this kindness. They would sail away without incident. Months later, the same pirate ship might return. The village would recognize them. The process would be smoother the second time. Trust had been established. Some villagers became regular trading partners with certain pirate crews. This was safer than raiding. This was more reliable than hoping for rain. This was commerce, stripped to its essentials. Water for silver, need for need. Human beings helping each other survive in a hard world. The worst time was the silent hours, deep in a water shortage. Days from any known source, rations cut to bare minimum. During these times, men did not talk much. Speaking required moisture, saliva, energy, better to save it. The ship would become quiet. Men would sit in shade, conserving energy. The only sounds were the wind in the rigging, the creak of wood, the splash of waves. Each man was alone with his thirst, feeling it constantly, the dry mouth, the thick tongue, the headache beginning behind the eyes, the skin feeling tight, the lips cracking. Water became the only thought. Dreams at night were of wells, streams, rain. Men would wake thinking they heard rain, only to find it was just waves against the hull. The quartermaster would distribute the rations at the same time each day, morning, midday, evening. The routine was important. It gave structure to the emptiness. Men would gather silently when ration time came. They would form a line. Each man would receive his cup, 3 ounces of water, a few swallows, nothing more. Some men would drink it immediately, desperate, gulping it down, feeling temporary relief. Others would sip slowly, making it last, holding each swallow in their mouth before swallowing, trying to maximize the sensation of wetness. A few would save half their ration, keeping it in their cup for later, having something to look forward to. This required tremendous discipline. Sitting there with water in your cup, not drinking it, while thirst screamed for relief. But these men understood delayed gratification. They understood that spreading the relief over time was psychologically easier than having it all at once and then having nothing. The captain would watch his crew during these silent hours, looking for signs of serious trouble, confusion, aggression, withdrawal. These were symptoms of severe dehydration. Men showing these signs needed to be watched, needed to be kept from doing something desperate. During one such period, on a ship captained by a man named Samuel Bellamy, a young crew member attempted to drink seawater. He waited until night. He thought no one would notice. He filled his cup from over the side and drank. Within hours, he was violently ill, vomiting, cramping, delirious. The salt water was purging fluid from his body faster than if he had drunk nothing. The quartermaster gave him extra water from the reserves. Not much extra, just enough to stabilize him. And the crew learned. They saw what happened. They understood viscerally why seawater was forbidden. That young man survived. He recovered, but he was weak for days, and he never forgot the lesson. Desperation leads to bad decisions. Patience is survival. Today, finding water seems effortless. We turn a handle and water flows. We buy bottles from stores. We never worry that water might not be available tomorrow. But for most of human history, water required work. Water required knowledge. Water required respect. The pirates understood this. They were not philosophers. They were not scientists. They were practical men solving practical problems. But in their methods, there was wisdom. They watched nature carefully. They learned patterns. They understood that survival meant cooperation with the world around them, not domination of it. They knew that water was a gift. Sometimes it came easily. Sometimes it required patience. But it always came, eventually, if you knew where to look and how to wait. This knowledge feels distant now, but perhaps it is worth remembering. Perhaps, on some level, we still need to understand that water is not automatic, that it comes from somewhere, that it requires care and gratitude. The pirates would have understood this. They lived it every day. The sea continues its endless motion. The ship rocks gently, cradled by waves that have traveled thousands of miles. Above, stars wheel slowly through the darkness. The same stars that guided sailors centuries ago. The same constellations that pirates used to navigate when all other references disappeared. In the hold below deck, barrels rest in neat rows, each one filled with water collected from rain, from streams, from the generous sky, each one representing safety, representing life. The ship's bell rings softly, marking the hour. To chimes, it is late. Most of the crew sleeps. A few men stand watch, looking at the horizon, watching for weather, watching for land. But tonight, there is no urgency. Tonight, the water barrels are full. Tonight, all is well. You can rest now. You have traveled far across this ocean of memory and history. You have learned how men survived with simple observations and patient attention. You have seen how they read clouds and followed birds, how they collected dew and waited for rain. These skills are no longer needed in your daily life, but the wisdom behind them remains valuable. The understanding that we are part of nature, not separate from it. The knowledge that careful observation reveals patterns. The patience to wait for what will come. Let these thoughts drift away now. Let them dissolve like salt in water. The ship continues its journey, but you do not need to watch anymore. Others are keeping watch. You are safe. The water is secure. Rest is permitted. The sound of waves against the hull is steady, consistent. Each wave the same as the last. Each wave different. The rhythm continues. It has always continued. It will continue long after we stop listening. Your breathing slows, in and out, like tides. Like the patient rhythm of the ocean itself. The stars above are dimming now. Not because they are fading, but because your eyes are closing. This is natural. This is good. Sleep is approaching on quiet feet, like rain moving across the surface of the sea. You can hear it coming, that soft whisper, that gentle sound. And now it arrives. Sleep, deep and peaceful, like water in a barrel, stored safely in the dark hold of a ship. Still, cool, at rest. Everything is calm. The journey continues, but you do not need to guide it. The wind knows where to blow. The water knows how to flow. And sleep knows how to find you. Let it come. Let it arrive. Let yourself sink into its depths. The ocean holds you. The ship rocks you. And sleep takes you home. Rest now. All is well. The water is found. The voyage continues. And you are safe, safe, safe. Rest.